Thanks, Linda. It's much appreciated. This is not exactly an unlinked topic from what Diana was talking about, because I suppose one of the things you have to ask in the first instance is why would we want to house the animals? And in our traditional grazing systems, maybe we have a little bit of reluctance to do that. But let's have a think about that. So April is doing her Masters in Animal Behaviour with Massey University, and one of her supervisors, Sam, is here. And it's great to be able to provide that linkage between our research program and the educational programs that Massey provides to make sure that we are training our future experts in this space. So, again, why would we put sheep indoors in our environment when we think that our feed quality is really high? And Diana came across one very good reason, that if you're in a drought and you leave them outside and you feed them outside, then your leaching losses are potentially a lot higher. That's interesting, isn't it? Now, if you're in a drought, then maybe you want to control their feed because you haven't got enough anyway. So we're better to control their feed than to have them indoors, off the pastures, reducing that risk. So that's an opportunity. I'm sure we all remember 2 years ago when we had rampant facial eczema in places where we didn't expect it to be. That's another really good reason to bring animals indoors in summertime when you are trying to make sure that they continue to lactate. These animals are really valuable in terms of the product that they produce, so why would we compromise that? So already we've got a couple of really good reasons that maybe we want some of these hybrid systems in place. Another thought is, especially in the North Island during the summer, that actually your outdoor temperatures are actually quite high during the summer, and maybe that's actually restricting the intake of the animal. Maybe you're better off bringing that animal indoors. And maybe especially if you have ryegrass endophyte, especially the wild type endophytes that restrict their intake anyway. So actually, when you start thinking about indoor sheep farming, there are some really good reasons why you would consider that. So that being said, how much information do we really have in New Zealand about those systems? And the answer is relatively little. Oh, too keen. So up at Spring Sheep, and again, thanks to Thomas and Nick and John for the opportunity to get on farm there and actually do some work with the systems that they have. They have built themselves a barn. And we had the opportunity last summer to have a look at what that might mean for the welfare of the animals and some of their activity. Again, thinking that if you're putting animals inside, you want to make sure that we are meeting that clean green expectation when we sell our product. And the opportunity there, and you'll note the numbers in there, we had the opportunity to use nearly 2,000 sheep in this study, and that's pretty powerful stuff when you're starting to compare systems. If you compare systems with 20 sheep, then maybe it's not so useful, but this is actually pretty powerful stuff. So we had a fully indoor system. We had a hybrid system that was grazing outside overnight on Lusu. So again, getting them out of the sun during the day, giving them the opportunity to graze at night. And those two were in mid-lactation ewes, and in late lactation ewes we had again a hybrid system where they were grazing outdoors overnight on pasture, or a fully outdoor system in that circumstance. So, and what April was interested in was some of the activity that was going on. So we looked at the walking distance using GPS collars. We looked at lying behaviour, so how much rest they were getting. That's a key indicator of animal welfare. We looked at the condition score and the live weight gain of the animals as they went through that period from around about Christmas, maybe the day before Christmas, thanks John, through to about the third week of February. Looked at the milk yields over that time, and we'll have a look at those, and we'll talk about why some of the things happened. And as April says there, it's really, really hard to replicate this sort of stuff on farm because of the scale that we're operating at, but also the extra work that we ask these guys to do. And believe me, that is significant. So here's just a look at the milk yields to start with. And you can see the top two lines here are the mid-lactation ewes, and the bottom line's the late lactation ewes. And you'll note, as normal, as they're running through before the trial here, and this is over the December, early January period, or just into the end of December, their production curves are coming down as we expect them to. And you'll also have noted in Diana's talk just before, she was talking about the fact that they got the cups in reasonably late in February and they were in the middle of a drought. Right. That drought took hold around about here. So you can see that as we transition these animals onto their new systems, there are some things going on with their diet as they transition off pasture and into indoors. You can see this group here seems to be going all right, and then it crashes. So it was outdoors in the hybrid system, and it crashed as the feed ran out outdoors. This one here was being transitioned onto new diet indoors. And again, a full transition is hard to achieve. Gives you some idea of what was going on there. So what April was looking at was, in first instance, how far do these animals walk and what sort of activity do they have? Okay. Now walking is a major part of the daily routine. And here you see the fully outdoor system versus a hybrid system. Now if you remember, I said that the hybrid system came in from the pasture in the morning and didn't go back out. So you see that they walked half the distance as the outdoor group that had to go back to pasture. And exactly the same in the afternoon. These were going back to pasture, these had to come in from the pasture and then go back out. The really interesting thing in this graph is not how far they walked between milkings or during milkings, it's their activity between milkings. And what you find there is the animals in the shed are as active as the animals out in the pasture. They are a social animal. They walk around, they go to the feeding trough, they go to the water trough, they go and visit their mates. They are still active animals. So they don't just lie there and do nothing. So that, I suppose, takes you forward to planning this type of, if you are planning to be indoors at some point, you do have to give them the opportunity to move around. There's no point in having them in such a confined space that they don't move around. They have to be able to exhibit their social activity. And we can see in this system that they were. So in terms of lying behaviour, now why do you record lying behaviour? You record lying behaviour because it is an indicator of how comfortable the animal is in its environment. Okay? If they are agitated and they don't like their environment, they will get up and they will stand and they will walk and they will talk to you, they will bleat, etc., etc. So this is an opportunity to look at how settled those animals were. And so what you see is a little bit of difference in indoor versus outdoor. So the hybrid system, they have more lying time during the day than the fully housed ones. Now that's kind of interesting because the hybrid ones came into the shed and obviously looks like they had a rest, which was kind of interesting in terms of how you think about how the animals are viewing their environment. However, overnight, there was longer lying periods in the fully housed animals. So, and again, very obviously, when you put animals back at pasture, they'll walk around and inspect their environment and they will have a feed. So that requires more walking about. So they're quite obvious outcomes. And the late lactation ones, the daytime ones, were actually spending slightly more time lying down during the day when they were fully grazed compared to the hybrids, which was kind of interesting to think that when they're adapted to their own environment and not changing environments, they were slightly more settled. Right, so they weren't going in and out of the shed. They knew their environment. Alrighty. So in terms of the condition of the animals, they were all in good condition, and they all gained condition, except for the full grazing system. And yet they didn't lose condition, they were still in very good condition. They didn't gain any live weight either, so those figures are very comparable. All the other systems gained a little bit of weight over that time and a little bit of condition. What that suggests is that these ones that were fully grazed, walking in and out, were at around about a zero energy balance from their own point of view. And you'll note, if you remember the graph that we had up on lactation, there was no difference between the hybrid system and the grazed system in terms of what they were, how much milk they were producing. So any difference between them has ended up in the hybrid system going onto the back of the animals and not into the vat in that sort of late lactation period. So overall, we're looking at some differences in milk yield, but it was only in the mid-lactation system, and it was greater in the hybrid than the fully housed one. And I'll talk a wee bit more about that comparison tomorrow when I talk about feed quality. So if you're around tomorrow morning, you'll be able to listen to that. There is certainly more energy expenditure when animals have to go to and from the paddock. That's not at issue. What is at issue is, do they have the opportunity to eat enough to cover that extra energy expenditure? Now, it might be that they're in there when they're at peak lactation, maybe they can't, and maybe you will see some sort of reduction because of that. What we saw here was the animals were still putting on condition, so they were able to eat more than enough to cover that extra expenditure. And then those ewes definitely had a higher energy expenditure walking to and from, but there was no real problem in terms of maintaining weight. So again, they were not in energy deficit by having to walk that extra distance. So just a wee bit of other thoughts around this. There's a general thought that sometimes spent outdoors grazing is a good thing from an animal welfare point of view. I would suggest that the numbers that we've got there in terms of resting periods and how settled those animals were, those systems all appear to be relatively comparable in terms of their animal welfare implications. Although you've got some lying times is supposed to be more settled, sometimes maybe they're not. If it's really hot, they'll tend to lie down anyway. And we still haven't really got our heads around exactly what that temperature gradient looks like, especially for housed systems, because we know that, and that's why, if you remember, the open sides of the shed that spring sheep have, it's exactly the reason why, is to make sure that you get airflow through those sheds and you actually keep the ambient temperatures down in what could potentially be a hothouse in the middle of summer. So it's about getting that balance right. So overall, there's no really significant difference being produced by the different systems. Sure, we saw some difference in terms of milk production. We can actually explain that based on feed quality that was going into the system, not on the system itself. We still need to have a look at some of these environmental factors and make sure that we nail those down so that we can say, hand on heart, that these systems work really well and we know that they are good for the animals. And again, we need to continue to replicate this so that we know that these results are robust. And just like, again, to reiterate, thank you to all of the team that is within this MB program, Maui Milk, Spring Sheep, and Kingsmead, along with our collaborators, Massey University, the Callaghan and Otago Uni. all really, really important, but in this instance, the biggest thanks goes to Spring Sheep Dairy for making available this type of facility for us to be able to do this work. Like I say, it is a lot of extra work for them. We didn't repeat it again this summer, just tells you something about how significant that is when you're trying to achieve some commercial objectives. Thank you very much.